Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and once again, thank you for stopping by. We went up to Lewa for the Saharan Marathon, and that was really a great deal of fun, and we took some film footage of the Jaguar, which is an F-Type 3.0 V6 convertible. We made a little vignette of the footage, and Sanjeev called it Jaguar in the Jungle, and it was a lot of fun, I must admit. I'll put up a photograph of the Jaguar as it drove up from Nairobi to Nanyuki in record time. I can't possibly tell you what time it was because it would get them in some trouble. And then also you remember we did that little promotion with Dr. Christian Turner when he took a spin in the same car. The number plate is 007, of course. Home thoughts start with this picture. An afternoon in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, photo by Isaac Goulart. Really, I thought it was beautiful and evocative. Wole Soyinka's, I'm going to talk about him, what he's saying about Nigeria in a moment, but made me go back to some of his quotations. Well, some people say I'm pessimistic because I recognize the eternal cycle of evil. All I say is, look at the history of mankind right up to this moment, and what do you find? And then, don't take shadows too seriously. Reality is your only safety. Continue to reject illusion. Political reflections. It didn't bring the Iranian people to kneel in submission, and it will not now nor in the future. A nuclear agreement would make history, he said, adding Iran is willing to take concrete measures to guarantee that our nuclear program will always remain peaceful. To those who continue to believe that sanctions brought Iran to the negotiating table, I can only say that pressure has been tried for the past 8 years. In fact, for the past 35 years. It didn't bring the Iranian people to kneel in submission, and it will not now nor in the future. This was Zarif, said both negotiating parties could put an end to the myth that Iran is seeking to build a bomb. And my conclusions are that so many people I meet who are well informed in these matters seem to believe that the deal was actually made a long time ago, and we are now watching a kind of political choreography. However, I personally think, even if it was done a long time ago, it's a lot more fluid than that, and things could pivot in multiple directions. Iranian attack jets apparently have been deployed to help Iraq fight ISIS, and this is on the BBC. And I concluded by saying Iran is doing a Museveni in Sudan. Move quickly, get your pieces on the board. And that goes back to the 28th of October when I wrote that piece about Barack Obama and Hassan Rouhani, the two Husseins, referenced What's in a Name by Ai Weiwei, and such a beautiful comment Ai Weiwei made. A name is the first and final marker of individual rights, one fixed part of the ever-changing human world. A name is the most basic characteristic of our human rights, no matter how poor or how rich. All living people have a name, and it is endowed with good wishes and the expectant blessings of kindness and virtue. And I do like that so much. But anyway, the issue here is, there has been a rapprochement. There is a school of thought that thinks the deal was done a long time ago, but nevertheless, knowing who's ranged on the other side of this rapprochement, Saudi Arabia, Israel, ISIS, amongst others, I don't think anyone can count this deal as being a done deal. The Roving Eye Arab Spring Jihad Summer by Pepe Escobar. Welcome to is, no typo, the final goal may be indiscriminate regime change, but for the moment name change will do. With PR flair at the start of Ramadan, the Islamic State of Iraq and Al-Sham, ISIS or ISIL, solemnly declared from now on it will be known as the Islamic State, or IS. To be or not to be is so metaphysically outdated. Is, and here it is in full audio glory. And we're talking about the full package, Caliph included. al-Baghdadi by residence and scholarship, or to put it more simply, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, has virtually ordered historic al-Qaeda, yes, that 9/11 related or not plaything of one Osama bin Laden, as well as every other jihadi outfit on the planet, to pledge allegiance to the new Imam, in theological theory, the new Lord over every Muslim. There's no evidence Osama's former sidekick Ayman the Doctor al-Zawahiri will obey, not to mention 1.5 billion Muslims across the world. Most probably al-Qaeda will say we are the real deal, and a major theological catfight will be on. After all, in Syria, ISIL as well as Jabhat al-Nusra were initially fighting under the banner of al-Qaeda until the brand, in spectacular fashion, decided to dump al-Baghdadi. He and ISIL went too far with all those videos of decapitations, crucifixions, and serial profanation of Shiite, Sufi, and Christian sanctuaries. And basically saying that, they are now loaded with oil and profiting from tax revenue, is now firmly on its way to provide services and support a mighty jihadi army. And like the Taliban, much like the Taliban from 1996 to 2001, one may be sure IS will continue its massive social engagement strategy. It's very interesting. People always say that these guys are stuck in a cave. But if you look at the social media, it really is. They are sort of 21st century PR, excellers. It's extraordinary. And then saying it's unclear how the new IS reality will play on the ground. The new caliph has in fact declared a jihad on all that basket of corrupt or incompetent Middle Eastern leaders. So some fierce battle for survival reaction from the houses of Saud and Thani, for instance, is expected. It's not far-fetched to picture al-Baghdadi dreaming of lording over Saudi oil fields after decapitating all Shiite workers, of course. And then asking about the future of the new $500 million Obama fund for appropriately vetted rebels in Syria, which in fact means the expansion of covert CIA training facilities in Jordan and Turkey. And then saying it's easier for Brazil to win the World Cup with a team of crybabies with no tactical nous than having US Secretary of State John Kerry and his State Department ciphers understand that the Syrian opposition is controlled by jihadis. But then again, they do know, and that perfectly fits into the empire of chaos's not-so-hidden global war on terror agenda of ever-expanding proxy war in both Syria and Iraq, fueled by terror financing. So 13 years ago, Washington crushed both al-Qaeda and the Taliban in Afghanistan. Then the Taliban were reborn. Then came shock and awe. Then came mission accomplished. Then al-Qaeda was introduced in Iraq. Then al-Qaeda was dead because Osama bin Laden was dead. Then came ISIL. Now there's IS. And we start all over again, not in the Hindu Kush, but in the Levant, with a new Osama. What's not to like? If anyone thinks this whole racket is part of a new live Monty Python sketch ahead of their reunion gig this month in London, that's because it is. Then I saw this tweet from a fellow called Dr. Shahid Massoud. The Islamic State reissues its 5-year expansion plan map with proposed states: Pakistan, India, Afghanistan, Iran, Central Asia, Khorasan. Quite extraordinary, isn't it? And then another comment I saw on BBC, so how vulnerable to a backlash from ISIS is Saudi Arabia, the world's largest oil producer and exporter? Good point, I thought. Jumping now to China, where apparently, according to a report on Bloomberg, Admiral Zheng He is everywhere in China these days, even though he died almost 600 years ago. The government is promoting him to remind its people and Asia that China's destiny is to be a great naval power. Of course, Admiral Zheng He embarked on a series of voyages with ships of unrivaled size and technical prowess, reaching as far as India and Africa. The expeditions are in the spotlight in official comments and state media as China lays claim to about 90% of the South China Sea, and President Xi Jinping seeks to revive China's maritime pride. The Chinese believe they have the right to be a great power. What we're seeing is a hardening of China's stance about its place in the world. Talking about the 1947 map that China's using to lay claim to this huge piece of sea, which is called in the 9-dash line. China's ultimate long-term goal is to obtain parity with U.S. naval capacity in the Pacific. They're a long way away from that. At this stage, the Chinese understand they don't have the capacity to take on the U.S. head-on. Sensing the U.S. is distracted by foreign policy challenges in the Middle East and Ukraine, China has been ratcheting up pressure on its neighbors. Lamb said it seized control of the Scarborough Shoal from the Philippines in 2012 as Chinese ships shooed away their rivals. China in early May towed $1 billion oil exploration rig into contested waters near the Paracel Islands off Vietnam, sparking skirmishes between Coast Guard vessels, the sinking of a Vietnamese fishing boat, and anti-Chinese demonstrations. In an attempt to soothe tensions, Premier Li Keqiang said June 18th that expansion is not in the Chinese DNA and that talks can ensure stability in the region. The charm rhetoric is still there, but the actions speak louder than words, and unfortunately the actions are scaring the hell out of Southeast Asia, says somebody else. It looks to Southeast Asia like China has taken off the gloves. China backing its assertiveness with a campaign of historical justification based on Zheng's voyages. First Fleet numbered more than 255 vessels, carried 27,000 crew. Project ended in 1433 after Zheng died. We should never forget this humiliating history, Xi said on June 27. We should remember our mission and improve our land and maritime frontier work in a steady way. National prestige matters particularly to the Chinese because they've been a great imperial power. China is promoting the historical memory of Zheng's voyages to justify its claim. Of course, the South China Sea is rich in resources. U.S. Energy Information Admin estimating it contains 11 billion barrels of oil and 190 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. Area almost 3.5 million square kilometers, contains several small islands, rocks and reefs, most located in the Paracel and Spratly Island chains. Sea plays a strategic role for China. It's a natural security shield for its densely populated southern regions and ports. China is testing the limits of America's alliance relationships in Asia, said Story, by pushing and probing and essentially showing that the US isn't willing to respond to these provocations. It is undermining those alliances and hence ultimately US credibility and US power over the long term. There are two schools of thought on the eventual outcome of China's ascendancy, according to Rory Medcalf, director of the International Security Program at the Lowy Institute for International Policy in Sydney. One argues that dominance of the South China Sea is an inevitable outcome of China's economic and military expansion. The other says that China will have to curb its ambitions or risk provoking a conflict, even war, which could draw in the US. It's not possible to judge which scenario ends up proving right, said Metcalf. The story is only beginning. And I concluded by saying I think we have moved to a new and much more adversarial normal. And I refer you back to that article, The Pivot to Asia Bears Its Fangs. I was talking about the ADIZ, about the US flying two B-52s directly into it, and saying, I said then that message was kind of incontestable. I said then I see the pivot to Asia as the encirclement of China, then the shrinking of its operating theatre, and then lighting the tinderbox that is the periphery, and Xinjiang might well morph into China's Afghanistan. He said the US probably feels it holds a decisive hard power advantage at this moment, and given that the trajectory is one of gradual erosion of that logic and of that decisive advantage, leads me to the view that this pivot to Asia has a logic and momentum of its own. Therefore, I see the US being increasingly determined to press its advantage. One might even posit that calming down the Iranian front allows the US to better concentrate its energies on the pivot to Asia. One of the key elements of the pivot to Asia is the air-sea battle concept. This concept envisages the battle beginning with a blinding attack against Chinese anti-access facilities and incorporates, and this is the important bit, distant blockade operations. China's dependence on foreign oil is increasing, just as the US's dependency is decreasing. And interestingly, given my belief that the Eastern Seaboard is a fabulous energy prize, further evidenced by the Sunbird 1 news, puts the Indian Ocean in many respects right into the geopolitical frame. If you are considering distant blockade operations, one of those areas you will be blockading is this part of the world, given the amount of energy that is likely to be sold and uplifted into Asia in the future. On that note, I'll put up the image of the snake, because the snake best encapsulates the idea of encirclement to me. I wrote previously that the first engagement between China and Kenya occurred in the 15th century, when the Chinese Admiral Zheng He visited the Swahili coast. Naturally, I said then, the Chinese have been keen on ventilating the story of Zheng He's 15th century visit because it is a soft power gift horse. You will recall the discovery of Chinese DNA on Pate Island, and the stories that the DNA belonged to Chinese Ming sailors who were shipwrecked and then married to the local women. I said then, I have no doubt that the Indian Ocean is set to regain its glory days. China's dependence on imported crude is increasing, and the US is decreasing. I said the Eastern Seaboard from Mozambique through Somalia is the last great energy prize in the 21st century, and therefore control of the Indian Ocean becomes kind of decisive, and with control, China can be shut down quickly. A sine qua non of President Obama's pivot to Asia is US-NATO power projection over the Indian Ocean. I'm going to put up a photograph of Pemba, Mozambique, which is of course on the Indian Ocean. I took the photograph from the sky as we were taking off, and another one of Maputo, which sits at the end of the reversible escalator monsoon wind. They used to bring people from Asia all the way to Maputo and then take them back again. Airport security stepped up after US warns of new threat. The UK is stepping up security, as is elsewhere, at airports after a request to do so from the US. On intelligence reports that militant groups in the Middle East are preparing a new generation of non-metallic explosives that could be carried undetected onto commercial flights. ABC News quoted a defense source as saying the threat is different and more disturbing than previous plots which involved explosives hidden in toothpaste, shoes, and ink cartridges. The US is increasing security at its airports and has asked other countries to do the same. A UK Department for Transport spokesman said Britain had decided to step up some of our aviation security measures, but declined to comment on the detail for obvious reasons. The majority of passengers should not experience significant disruption. President Obama has said that his administration is particularly concerned by the presence of foreign militants in Syria and Iraq who could board flights to the US without a visa using their European passports. In an interview with NBC, Obama said, "We've seen Europeans who are sympathetic to their cause traveling into Syria and now travel into Iraq, getting battle-hardened. Then they come back." And I'll leave you with a quote which was being made about Somalia, but which I think applies to Kenya. "The consequences of tribal identity becoming the grammar of politics in the country are already conspicuous. Currency markets, Euro 136.50, dollar index just below 80, 79.99, Japanese yen 101.86, Swiss 0.8894, pound 171.56, it's going above 173.80 in my view, Aussie 0.9378, India rupee improving because crude oil has fallen back 59.64, South Korean won 10.0930, Rial 222.52, Egyptian pound 714.88, and the South African rand soft 1074.57. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index, and as I said yesterday, we were at the bottom of the trading range. We've been oscillating between 79 and 81 for a long time. We'll remain in that range. Euro dollar 136.50, very resilient. And sterling, of course, I'll put up a 3-month chart, and you know what I think about that. I remain bullish. It remains my trade of the year in point of fact, and I think we could even see 2-to-1 at some point. Gold, little bit softer overnight, 1322.78. Crude oil a lot softer, 104.09. Obviously, the geopolitical risk, they haven't had a big event happen in the last few days, and therefore I think you've had a little bit of premium come out. But as I've said previously, this could spike big at any time. I like this painted black. Botura's black on black dish is a homage to Thelonious Monk. Ash encrusted black cod in a sauce of squid ink. Photography by Matteo Imbriani from the Wall Street Journal magazine. Looks tasty. Coming to Africa, US military advisors have secretly operated in Somalia since around 2007, and Washington plans to deepen its security assistance to help the country fend off threats by Islamist militant group Al-Shabaab. Deployments consisting of up to 120 troops on the ground go beyond the Pentagon's January announcement that it had sent a handful of advisors in October. US plans include greater military engagement, new funds for training and assistance from the Somali National Army after years of working with the African Union Mission in Somalia, or AMISOM, which has about 22,000 troops in the country from Uganda, Kenya, Sierra Leone, Burundi, Djibouti and Ethiopia. What you'll see with this upcoming fiscal year is the beginning of engagement with the SNA proper, said a US defense official. Comments expand upon a little notice section of a speech given early in June by Wendy Sherman, Under Secretary of State for Political Affairs. She publicly acknowledged that a small contingent of US military personnel, including Special Operations Forces, had been present in parts of Somalia for several years. Clearly they're stepping up that engagement. Congo Catholic bishops urged Kabila to step aside in 2016, and that's an interesting break because the Catholic Church has been previously a pillar of support for Kabila. This is therefore a big and important break. The South African All Share has reached another record. It's up 12.1649% this year. Dollar Rand softer, 10.7447. Key support is just below 11. Egyptian pound 7.1494. But interestingly, a report came out that Egypt's business activity expanded in June. PMI has hit a 6-month high, which is interesting. The Egyptian stock market's up 20.053% this year. The Nigerian All Share is at more than 5-year highs and up 3.097% this year. Wole Soyinka, who I quoted earlier, says, "We have never been confronted with butchery on this scale, even during the Civil War." I'll put up a photograph of him, refer you back to that quotation from Abu Bakr Shekau, "We are in your city," and then jump to a report on Reuters that Citibank CEOs in Nigeria is saying foreign investors have shrugged off Nigeria's security threat, which was something I was talking about before. Worsening security in Nigeria has not deterred foreign investors from buying its assets, Citigroup's country head said on Wednesday. Any spread of attacks further south or to the commercial hub of Lagos, that's key, could start to put even established investors off, Omar Hafiz told Reuters in an interview. I think he's spot on. Ghana Stock Exchange is up 10.675%, but you've lost all your returns. I'm going to put up a Ghana SEDI chart because that's down nearly 29 or 30%. So you've lost 30% on the currency, you've made 10.675% on the market, you're net down. Wrote about this on the 28th of April when I said rising fiscal imbalances, the region's Achilles heel, and I was specifically referring to Ghana and Zambia. Tobacco farmers in Zimbabwe sold about 205.5 million kilograms of the crop in the marketing season that ended June 27th, breaching the 200 million kilogram mark for the first time since 2001. South Sudan apparently are going to borrow $1 billion from oil firms in their 2014-2015 budget. I'm not so sure those oil firms will be that keen on extending the government credit at this time. The Nairobi Stock Exchange is planning an IPO. I did an interview on MoneyWeb, and the link for the verbatim interview is on the website. Alternatively, you can just simply listen to the audio. But essentially, I'm confident about it. It's a small sale, 31% of the shares, and I think it's going to improve governance in the medium term. I did that interview with Dr. Titus Naikuni. We've also got the link for the full year results, Kenya Airways results. The share price has fallen quite dramatically, but go and have a look at, listen to what they're saying, because the turnaround is at hand, and I think you saw a 66% improvement, though still declaring a loss. But when that pendulum swings, it's going to swing into the positive territory going forward. But of course, near-term softness is a worry. Kenya has awarded a 43 billion shilling, which is $490 million, contract to build a fuel pipeline linking Mombasa and Nairobi. Kenya shilling at 87.75 last. Nairobi All Share very strong yesterday, rallied a 1% and has closed at a record high. It's up 12.433% in 2014. NSE 20, 4 points below the unchanged mark. Big rally yesterday, but contextualize that against the backdrop where we've got very strong performance in South Africa, Nigeria, for example, as well, at more than 60-month highs. Equity turnover was busy yesterday, clocked 1.139 billion. Safaricom rallied 2.3715%. Uchumi unchanged. The point I'm making is that I think Uchumi is a takeover target at this price. $37.18 million valuation is really ludicrous. Standard Group has been performing. Nation Media was down slightly, probably on the news that People's Daily is now a free newspaper. KCB missed a third consecutive record closing high by the least allowable fraction yesterday. And then interesting price action after sort of rallying everything on the news that Britain was to buy equity stake in housing finance. More granularity yesterday in the performance. Let's see how that plays out. And EABL surged 3.793% to regain a 2014 closing high and looks very strong again. Once again, thank you for stopping by. I do appreciate it.